Hi, Aaron Gustafson at Transcend Bodywork. Seems like a timely time to share my story about opiates, awakening, and how I became a massage therapist. I can share this story because it's the story of my life. Doesn't mean it's the way that it works for everybody, but it's my reality and it's how I got to be who I am today. And a large part of that is the experience I had with my father. He passed away 2 Octobers ago. By the time of his death, he had been to the end of the opiate road, had been on methadone for several years, had to go through medically assisted alcohol detox because nothing was taking the edge off for him. By the time he went into the ICU the day before he died, he had become so dissociated from his own sensations in his body. He couldn't differentiate between the sepsis that killed him, his spinal fusion pain, kidney pain, and the chronic pain that he suffered since I was age 11. He had had a traumatic brain injury when he was 17 years old. He had a benign tumor growing in his head, and it caused him to pass out while he was driving over a highway overpass. Well, his car crashed off the highway overpass, and it was a divided lane, and he went down underneath the oncoming lane and hit the concrete support piling and flew through his windshield and cracked the top of his skull on the concrete piling. Well, it was a blessing in disguise. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. The doctors, when they were repairing the fractured skull, discovered that he had a benign tumor growing in the meninges of his brain, and that was most likely what caused him to lose consciousness and drive off the overpass in the first place. So they were able to remove the tumor that they said would have killed him within a few weeks. Had he not had this accident, and they found it. Well, plate technology was rather new at the time, and so they tied it in with muscle fiber. No screws, no wires, just the fascia and the tissue, and anchored it in place there. That's also why he didn't go to Vietnam, as the concussion of a howitzer firing next to him could have knocked his plate loose, so he wasn't able to serve when he tried to sign up. Again, another reason why maybe I'm here today through the blessing of this accident. And when I was 10, he got into another auto accident. He was broadsided and hit the side of his head where the plate was on the window of the car, and it initiated a process of increasing and chronic pain for him. And this was before MRI technology was present in public hospitals. It existed, but it hasn't been approved by the FDA to be used on the public yet. So as he went through this process of debilitating chronic pain, his business went through bankruptcy. He had a disability insurance policy, and he went to binding arbitration. And the doctors that the insurance company hired to examine him and testify against him, and our own family doctor, basically had the arbitrators side, 2-to-1 for the insurance company, saying that what was happening to him was all psychosomatic. He was making it up in his brain, and he was just trying to commit insurance fraud. Well, a week later, the first MRI machine went into a hospital in Portland. And he was there, and he got an image of his head. And they were able to see that the plate had become torn free from its fascial and muscle fastening to his skull, and it had moved in 5 millimeters on his cerebral cortex. And the pressure on his brain and that pressure from the second traumatic brain injury was initiating peripheral nerve damage processes throughout his body. And the doctor, our family doctor, contacted the insurance company a week later and was like, hey, you guys, this case that we tried last week? What don't you understand about traumatic brain injury? And the insurance company said to the doctor, what don't you understand about binding arbitration? So at that point in time, my dad lost his auto fleet and lease company. He also had an auto mechanics repair shop, and my family went on to Social Security disability. This was also a very hard time for our family because my parents divorced, and I ended up living with just my dad, and my sister ended up living with my mother. And from age 11 to age 18, I ended up filling a primary physical and emotional caregiver role for my father, all the while watching him do the standard opiate medicating route for his chronic pain. And I was always confused a little bit why he didn't seem to be more curious about his pain. He was what I call now the quintessential baby boomer patient. And what that means, the baby boomers to me are the last generation on the planet that grew up outside of the age of information, having computers, Google, being able to go, oh, what's this bump on my arm? And find out some information or at least some questions to ask my doctor when I go and see it. Being that quintessential baby boomer patient, my father handed over all of his personal authority to his doctor. Said, okay, doc, tell me what to do and I'll do it. As long as it meant not having to look deeper into what was happening inside of him and his own feelings. He went the symptom management route. What surgery can I have? What pill can I take? And I remember him being so masked and dissociated from the sensations in his body. On multiple occasions, he would tear his own muscles just working on a car. He would be cranking on a bolt and he would tear his pec major, and then he would have another injury. His body would set up another compensation pattern, so on and so forth. And what has come apparent to me is that as an owner-operator of a body, we have two choices. We can choose to associate with it, or we can choose to dissociate from it. Opiates represent dissociative care. Looking into our own sensations, putting our hands on it, asking questions about it, feeling, thinking, finding out what more we can do. Do we have to feel this way? Is there another option? Is there another way I can learn to move or hold myself? Are there other changes I can make in my life to make my tissue healthier so that there's less chance of inflammatory process popping up? That would be associative care. And I think that's a really important differentiation to make, because I find myself in this career because of my own personal healing path of associating with what's going on inside of me and my sensations in my body. It's very much the opposite of what I saw my father doing when I was growing up, and as teen sons do, we like to rebel and go the other way. And what does this have to do with me becoming a massage therapist, and how do opiates play into my story? Well, when I was 18 and got to leave, finally just focus on myself and didn't have to worry about Dad's emotional and physical well-being, I had that bandwidth all kind of used up. I was mostly just interested in what I could do for myself, didn't have any interest in caring for other people. Well, at that point in time, the universe intervened, smacked me upside the head and said it was time to pay attention. At the Oregon Country Fair, when I was 19, thanks to the help of some psychedelics, I ended up having my first at-one with the universe experience, where I could feel the connection of every cell and molecule of my body being the same thing as everything around me. And what initiated this, believe it or not, was opium. While I was tripping at the country fair, I ran into a coworker and we were smoking a couple bowls of cannabis. And unbeknownst to me, he put in a little ball of opium, like the actual tar that comes from poppy flower, not processed pharmaceutical opiates, just actual resin from the plant spirit. And it put a whole new aspect on the psychedelic journey that I was having. I had never had opium before. And it was my first experience of understanding the allure of what it means. I felt a warm, fuzzy, happy, insulating blanket go around every cell in my body, with the same kind of heightened psychedelic attention to detail that psychedelics allow. And it was this new curious experience. I said, what is this feeling? And the next thing I know, there was a voice in my head. Wasn't my voice, wasn't my thinking voice. It was a deep, authoritative, sounded male voice. It said, "This is love. This is your spirit. This is the spirit of everything." And in that moment, from every cell, I could feel love radiating, coming from me to everything around me, and I could feel love being received, radiating from everything around me. Again, a seamless continuity of everything being one thing, and we are all it. So this experience went further. My consciousness continued to go further and further and further, dissociated from my physical being and deeper into my spiritual journey. And I found myself being awoken by my spirit guides. There were 3 beings, and their faces changed every 1/10 of a second, from everybody I ever had loved through everybody I ever would. And they kept wandering in. I found myself just not in control of my body. I was stuck in the most comfortable chair of my most favorite room in every home I'd ever lived in and loved, through every home I ever will live in and love. And that's the weirdest part, because when I go into a new place, I have what I call conscious deja vus of that experience when I was 19. Well, these spirit guides kept coming through the room and looking at me and just saying, "Oh, good morning, Aaron. You made it. You're awake. We love you. Yes, you figured it out. You're the divine one thing. Everything is one thing, and we are all it." And I was very confused, trying to process with my 19-year-old brain how to communicate with these folks and give them anything of relevance. Well, what they were interested in were my feelings. And I wanted to talk to them about my ego, my shiny image on the outside. "Well, did you guys know I have a motorcycle?" "Well, yeah, we know you have a motorcycle, Aaron. How do you feel about that?" It was the feelings. They wanted to know what my experience on the inside was. And it got a little increasingly hard, as the opium had helped me dissociate from my body to be able to describe experiences, and I expressed my frustration to my spirit guides. I said, "I want to get this all now," and they gave me a choice. They said, "You can try to understand this with your 19-year-old brain, and if that's what you choose, that means you wake back up in your body insane. Or you can surrender and let go of needing to understand and make sense of all of this right now, and know that when you need the information you need, it will be there for you, and trust this feeling." And in that moment, they taught me the feeling of resonant agreement between my heart and my mind. And they told me that would be my compass needle to follow through life. And they said if I chose that, that meant I got to go back to my body sane. I said, "Option B, I want to go back. Sanity sounds good. I'll follow that needle." So I woke up in the trip tent at the Oregon Country Fair, a nice gentleman named Raven squatting down with his kilt, handing me, he didn't have any underwear on, that was, you know, I was on ground level looking right up. That was one of the more vivid memories, handing me apple juice and raisins, asking me if I was going to hurt anybody. Which was extremely comical, finding out that I'm a part of the same thing, that's everything, and it's all love. I just had to laugh inside of myself and go, no. And the way that I understand this now, it's the same, kind of think about how a raindrop relates to the ocean. A raindrop feels all isolated and bound up by its surface tension, just like a human trapped in a body inside our ego, protecting our vulnerable bits and the worlds from judging us. But we can become one with the ocean again. And that's the same thing we can do with our spirits and love when we drop the shields of our ego, by looking into our feelings and expressing them openly rather than trying to battle with them and contain them and suppress them. Again, we come back to this idea of associate versus dissociate. So, how does this relate to me being a massage therapist? I started following this compass needle around through life, and the first place it led me to, I'd find it pinging when I would go by bookstores, and then I would follow it. It would get warmer, hotter, just like playing that game when we were young. Oh yeah, you're getting warmer. Oh no, colder, colder. It would get warmer and hotter, and it would lead me to a shelf, and my hand would go to a book and it would pull it out. The first book that I pulled off a shelf was on witchcraft. I read it. And it was the first place I found any language whatsoever of someone describing a state of, through the use of plant spirits, the flying salve, the nightshade balms that the witches used to use, they would use it to convene with spirit in a state of perfect love and perfect trust through their trance state. Well, wow, nobody had ever talked to me about that before. We had United Church of Christ Grandpa who talked about spirit being out here and somebody that you're trying to follow the rules to get in the good graces of. Then I read about somebody who was actually saying, no, it's a real thing. You can have a pragmatic experience with it. Why don't you figure out what you can do with yours? And so, wow, that was amazing. And as I continued that study, the next thing it led me to was studying shamanism, which is the global practice of indigenous cultures all coming up with their own way of entering trance state to communicate with the spirit world to affect things in the physical realm. So again, journeys within to change our experience out here. And it dawned on me, the next place I went to learn anything was about Reiki. And this was a real juxtaposition to that 18, 19-year-old angry young man who didn't want to care for anybody when I figured out Spirit's compass was leading me to healing arts. So I decided I'd ask my totem badger at a shamanic drumming circle what he thought about massage school. Well, he took off his robe, hopped up on a massage table and said, "Bring it on." So I ended up going to East West College of the Healing Arts here in Portland. And I've spent the last 18 years learning how to put my own hands on someone else's body, my own body, interfacing with that owner-operator, experiencing their sensations in their nervous system, and through that process of loving, caring association with their own experience and their own body, helping people get out of pain, find function, find movement, get off chronic pain medication. And again, it's through the act of wanting to know, wanting to feel, and wanting to associate. And that option is here for all of us now. It's hard. I've had enough experience taking opiates in my life now through injuries, through dental work, that I understand the danger, because it does detach us from what's happening here so that we cannot take ownership of it. It makes our body opaque to our mind. We cannot see, feel, or understand where our sensations are coming from. And that doesn't just happen with opiates. Too much ibuprofen use makes us a little bit numb to what's going on in our body as well. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't a time and place for all of these drugs, opiates. I'm really glad that I had opiates when I got my wisdom teeth taken out or when I had my root canal. But what sucks is the reconnection or the transition from dissociated back to associated. Because there was something that sucked that we were associating with, that we made a choice and took something to help us dissociate from it. But as we put that compensation, maybe it's a drug, maybe it's a compensation pattern between that experience and our consciousness not wanting to be bothered by it, we remove that guard, whether it's the opiate, whether it's the holding pattern. Consciousness then has to associate with its own sensations again, and that can mean moving back into the suck. It's a tender situation. And I want you to think about that word when we talk about associating and dissociating. We will have to move back through tenderness. We will have to move back into tissues that are fatigued, screaming about workout soreness because you're using them all the time, telling you just how tired they are. And that's the hard part. And that's when we remove the numbing agent, opiate or holding pattern, we have to go in and start taking responsibility for those things that sucked. And that can suck again, and it makes it easy to go right back the other way. Associate or dissociate. To be transparent or to be opaque. To fight the war of ego, controlling and suppressing things that make us feel vulnerable and frightened, or to fight the war of the good work, of associating, going in, caring for suffering, alleviating inequity, helping all of our cells have a place of equity within our body, rather than suppressing the messages that they're sending to us. That's the funny thing about bodywork versus taking a numbing agent. Bodywork is an amplifier of feeling that helps the owner-operator associate where it comes from and do they have an option to let it go? Do they need that tension? Does it serve them or not? Are there new ways that they can hold themselves that feel more comfortable and more efficient? It can be a lot of time and mental work to go through that bodywork process. And what's ironic about it is we do all of that work so that we don't feel body. But it's a transparent lack of feeling. If our body has something to say, the communication channels are open. Very different than suppressed sensation, opaque, take an opiate, make it go numb. A transparent body is light and free. It takes your head where your head wants to go, when it wants to go there, and it brings joy. That's my story of opiates, awakening, and how I became a massage therapist. I hope my story can help you have a little perspective into yours.